Welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to be talking about the Cold War. The Cold War was a period of geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union and their respective allies from the mid-1940s to the early 1990s. It was fought on political, economic, and propaganda fronts, and had only limited recourse to weapons. The Cold War had a profound impact on the world, and its legacy continues to be felt today. In this video, we're going to explore the causes, consequences, and legacy of the Cold War. So, let's start with what caused the Cold War. Ideological differences. The United States was founded on the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and limited government. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, was a one-party communist state, in which the government controlled all aspects of economic and social life. The United States believed in capitalism, a system based on private ownership of property and free markets. The Soviet Union believed in communism, a system based on public ownership of property and a centrally planned economy. The United States also believed in promoting human rights and democracy around the world. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, was often willing to support authoritarian regimes that aligned with its interests. These ideological differences led to a deep mutual distrust and suspicion between the United States and the Soviet Union. Each side saw the other as a threat to its way of life. Post-World War II tensions. World War II left Europe in ruins. The Soviet Union occupied much of Eastern Europe, and the United States and its allies occupied Western Europe. The Soviet Union was determined to maintain control of Eastern Europe to create a buffer zone against future invasions from the West. The United States and its allies, on the other hand, feared that the Soviet Union would expand its communist system into Western Europe. The Soviet Union also sought to expand its influence in other parts of the world, such as Asia and Africa. The United States and its allies tried to counter the Soviet expansion by supporting anti-communist governments and movements. These tensions led to a number of conflicts around the world, such as the Berlin Blockade, the Korean War, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The nuclear arms race. In 1945, the United States became the first country to develop nuclear weapons. In 1949, the Soviet Union successfully tested its own atomic bomb. The development of nuclear weapons created a new dimension to the Cold War. Both the United States and the Soviet Union knew that a nuclear war would be devastating, so they avoided direct military conflict. However, they continued to build up their nuclear arsenals in an effort to deter the other side from attacking. The nuclear arms race was a major source of tension during the Cold War. It raised the risk of accidental war and increased the fear of nuclear annihilation. A few other factors are as follows. The rise of nationalism in the Soviet republics also contributed to the Cold War. Many of the Soviet republics, such as Ukraine and the Baltic states, had their own unique cultures and histories. After World War II, there was a growing movement for independence in some of these republics. The United States was also concerned about the spread of communism in China. In 1949, the Chinese Communist Party defeated the nationalist government and established the People's Republic of China. This event alarmed the United States and its allies, who feared that the Soviet Union and China would form a united communist bloc. The Cold War was a complex and multifaceted conflict. The causes discussed above are just some of the most important factors that contributed to its outbreak and continuation. It is important to note that the Cold War was not simply a conflict between two superpowers. It was also a global conflict that had a profound impact on people all over the world. The Cold War shaped the course of the 20th century and continues to have a legacy today. Now let's move on to the consequences of the Cold War. Proxy wars. The Cold War led to a number of proxy wars around the world. As the United States and the Soviet Union supported opposing sides in conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. These wars resulted in millions of deaths and caused widespread devastation. For example, the Korean War 1950-1953 resulted in the deaths of an estimated 2.5 million people, including over 1 million civilians. The Vietnam War 1954-1975 resulted in the deaths of an estimated 3 million people, including over 1 million civilians. The Afghan War 1979-1989 resulted in the deaths of an estimated 1 million people, including over 500,000 civilians. Nuclear arms race. The Cold War also led to a massive nuclear arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both countries built up arsenals of thousands of nuclear weapons, which posed a grave threat to global security. At the peak of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union had a combined nuclear arsenal of over 60,000 nuclear weapons. This was enough to destroy the world multiple times. The nuclear arms race also raised the risk of accidental war, as both sides were constantly on high alert. Division of Europe. The Cold War divided Europe into two opposing blocs: the North Atlantic Treaty Organization (NATO), led by the United States, and the Warsaw Pact, led by the Soviet Union. This division had a profound impact on European politics and society. The division of Europe was a constant source of tension and instability. It also led to the construction of the Berlin Wall, which divided the city of Berlin into two parts for nearly 30 years. Espionage and propaganda. The Cold War was also characterized by a high level of espionage and propaganda. Both sides used spies to gather intelligence on the other, and they also used propaganda to try to influence public opinion. The Cold War was also characterized by a high level of espionage and propaganda. Both sides used spies to gather intelligence on the other, and they also used propaganda to try to influence public opinion. Espionage and propaganda created an atmosphere of distrust and suspicion between the United States and the Soviet Union. It also led to a number of incidents, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis, which brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. There were a few positive consequences as well. Technological breakthroughs. The Cold War led to a number of technological breakthroughs, including the development of computers, space exploration, and the Internet. The Cold War spurred innovation in a number of fields, including computer science, rocketry, and materials science. This led to the development of new technologies that have had a profound impact on the world. For example, the development of computers led to the rise of the personal computer and the Internet. Space exploration led to the development of new technologies that have been used to improve satellite communications and weather forecasting. Promotion of human rights and democracy. The Cold War also helps to promote human rights and democracy around the world. The United States and its allies often supported pro-democracy movements in countries that were ruled by authoritarian regimes. The United States and its allies also promoted human rights through international organizations such as the United Nations. This helped to raise awareness of human rights issues and put pressure on authoritarian regimes to improve their human rights records. Increased cooperation between the United States and its allies. The Cold War also led to increased cooperation between the United States and its allies. This cooperation helped to strengthen the global economy and promote peace and stability. The United States and its allies formed organizations such as NATO and the European Union to promote cooperation on security and economic issues. This cooperation helped to prevent wars and promote economic growth. Overall, the Cold War was a complex and multifaceted conflict with both positive and negative consequences. Its legacy continues to be felt today. The Cold War ended in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. There were a number of factors that contributed to the end of the Cold War, including economic problems. The Soviet economy was in shambles by the late 1980s. It was burdened by high military spending and a centralized economy that was inefficient and unresponsive to the needs of the people. The Soviet economy was in shambles by the late 1980s. It was burdened by high military spending and a centralized economy that was inefficient and unresponsive to the needs of the people. Political reforms. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduced a number of political reforms in an attempt to revitalize the Soviet economy and political system. These reforms, known as glasnost and perestroika, led to a weakening of the Communist Party and the rise of nationalism in the Soviet republics. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduced a number of political reforms in an attempt to revitalize the Soviet economy and political system. These reforms, known as glasnost and perestroika, led to a weakening of the Communist Party and the rise of nationalism in the Soviet republics. Glasnost was a policy of openness and transparency. It allowed for greater freedom of speech and expression, which led to criticism of the Communist Party and the Soviet government. Perestroika was a policy of economic restructuring. It gave more autonomy to businesses and individuals, and it allowed for more private ownership of property. These reforms led to a weakening of the Communist Party and the rise of nationalism in the Soviet republics. Nationalist movements emerged in the Baltic republics, Ukraine, and other Soviet republics. These movements demanded greater autonomy and, in some cases, independence from the Soviet Union. The rise of nationalism. The Soviet Union was a multi-ethnic state, and the rise of nationalism in the Soviet republics posed a major challenge to the central government. In 1991, the Baltic republics of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania declared their independence from the Soviet Union. This was followed by the collapse of the Soviet Union itself in December 1991. The end of the Cold War was a major turning point in world history. It led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the emergence of new independent states in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. It also led to a new era of global cooperation and economic integration. The Soviet Union was a multi-ethnic state, and the rise of nationalism in the Soviet republics posed a major challenge to the central government. In 1991, the Baltic republics of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania declared their independence from the Soviet Union. This was followed by the collapse of the Soviet Union itself in December 1991. The rise of nationalism was a major factor in the end of the Cold War. The Soviet government was unable to suppress the nationalist movements in the Soviet republics. This led to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the emergence of new independent states in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. The end of the Cold War was a major event in world history. It led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the emergence of new independent states in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. It also led to a new era of global cooperation and economic integration. Let's now discuss the legacy of the Cold War. The Cold War was a period of geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union and their respective allies from the mid-1940s to the early 1990s. It was fought on political, economic, and propaganda fronts, and had only limited recourse to weapons. The legacy of the Cold War is complex and multifaceted, but some of the key consequences include political consequences. The end of the Cold War led to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the emergence of new independent states in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. It also led to the creation of new international organizations, such as the Commonwealth of Independent States (CIS) and the North Atlantic Cooperation Council (NAC). The Cold War also led to the development of new security concepts, such as collective security and cooperative security. Economic consequences. The end of the Cold War led to a period of economic growth and prosperity in many parts of the world. It also led to the expansion of the global economy and the increased integration of global markets. The Cold War also led to the development of new economic institutions, such as the World Trade Organization (WTO) and the International Monetary Fund (IMF). Social consequences. The end of the Cold War led to the spread of democracy and human rights around the world. It also led to the increased movement of people and goods across borders. The Cold War also led to the development of new social movements, such as the environmental movement and the women's rights movement. Cultural consequences. The end of the Cold War led to the increased exchange of ideas and cultures around the world. It also led to the development of new cultural forms, such as hip-hop and global cinema. The Cold War also led to the rise of new cultural icons, such as Nelson Mandela and Mikhail Gorbachev. The Cold War was a defining event of the 20th century, and its legacy continues to be felt today. It shaped the course of world events and had a profound impact on the lives of millions of people around the world. Here are some specific examples of the legacy of the Cold War. The expansion of NATO. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO expanded eastward to include former Soviet bloc countries such as Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. This expansion was seen as a way to promote democracy and stability in Eastern Europe and to deter Russian aggression. The rise of China. China emerged from the Cold War as a major economic and military power. China's rise has led to concerns about the balance of power in Asia and the world. The War on Terror. The September 11, 2001 attacks on the United States led to the War on Terror, a global campaign against terrorism. The War on Terror has had a significant impact on global politics and security. The rise of nationalism. The rise of nationalism in many parts of the world has been another legacy of the Cold War. Nationalism has led to conflicts such as the war in the Balkans and the war in Ukraine. The spread of democracy. The end of the Cold War led to the spread of democracy around the world. However, democracy has also been challenged in recent years by the rise of authoritarian regimes. The Cold War was a complex and multifaceted conflict with a lasting legacy. Its impact on the world can still be felt today in the areas of politics, economics, society, and culture. The Cold War was a complex and multifaceted conflict with a lasting legacy. It is important to understand the causes, consequences, and legacy of the Cold War in order to better understand the world today. The Cold War may be over, but its legacy continues to shape our world. From the rise of China to the War on Terror, the Cold War has had a profound impact on our lives. The Cold War ended in 1991, but its legacy continues to be felt today. The rise of China, the War on Terror, and the rise of nationalism are just a few examples of the Cold War's lasting impact. The Cold War taught us the importance of peace and cooperation. It also taught us the dangers of nuclear war and the importance of arms control. The Cold War was a defining event of the 20th century, and its legacy continues to shape our world today. I hope you enjoyed this video about the Cold War. If you did, please like and subscribe to my channel for more videos on history and current events.